All right, so now I'm switching over to the consolidation of Roman Catholicism, and I just kind of want to point out there's several things that I think we can all look at when we're reading this text. One, many um, in America are practitioners of or baptized into the Roman Catholic Church, um, and this is a looking at religious history. Um, and it's for many people looking at our modern Western values now, since we're talking about Western civilization, the values that we have in Western civilization now and the things that we see here, I think it's fair to say, kind of we find jarring, to say the least. And for Protestants, that is the Christians who protested against the Catholic Church, which the majority of Americans have been historically, point out all of these things that we learn as the corruption of the church. What I would like us to try to do is, while we can find it interesting and no doubt we'll have an opinion about what to make of religion so embedded in politics and willing to do so many things that can look to be corrupt and brutal, we need to not lose sight of the fact of seeing what the church's role is in creating Western civilization. Okay, and again, we're not even saying if that's good or bad, but we have to kind of pay. If you're not an anarchist and if you don't want a radically different system in particular, if you like Western style democracies and the making of a nation state, if you aren't repulsed by monarchies at the very least, even if you like them as more symbolic heads of state. You remember the popularity of Princess Diana um, when she was alive. um, well, this is the legacy that the church helped create. And that Roman legacy, as we talked about in the past, was preserved through the consolidation of Roman Catholicism. So, again, I'm not even making a defense of anything. I just want us to not, I think sometimes I kind of feel like I know where a certain, I know when I was younger, I would read this and I was strictly concentrated on the theology because it was a big deal in my family. And I think, as I've mentioned before, my dad's side is Roman Catholic and my mom's side is Protestant, and I heard lots of intense things about this, and I had Catholic clergy on my dad's side and Protestant clergy on my mom's side. So I always looked at these things strictly through that lens. And now, as I get older, you start seeing that there's a little bit more to it. But nonetheless, the theology was there and the ideas were there. But I want you to think about the functionality of certain things and think about what people were coming out of very, very tough periods. And with the agricultural revolution, creating some space for people there, but still a lot of wealth disparity, still high infant mortality rates and poverty. And then a church that is trying to, create some sort of order out of chaos. And so the monasteries that are created, one could argue that the fact that you're in college right now, and as you'll see this, and that you're at a university setting, really comes out of these kind of reforms that the church were taking. That even though at the time it might have just been monks copying books or learning some rudimentary Latin grammar as a start, that the idea of an institution that can maintain books and a certain amount of learning, this is going to be important to the Western legacy that the entire world, for the most part, shares now. Um, and so that's something to think about. The But there was the issue of the wealth of the church, and this is for Roman Catholicism, this is kind of plagued, if we want to use that term, the church with how to maintain itself as a real structure. Money does create power, and it gives you the ability to assert yourself, to be able to create monasteries, or to have the ability to make things happen, right? Okay, but at the same time, money also, people gravitate towards money that are interested in spiritual things, as a religious person would mention, for example. And so you had issues that were having to deal with this. I think it's interesting, right? There's the Roman Catholic Church now, to this day, has a big difficulty maintaining the celibacy of priests. And there has been, and this is not to get controversial and disrespectful on those from the Roman Catholic side, but the issue of sexual abuse by priests, and the whole idea of forced celibacy, that maybe men who want to be celibate, but they don't want to be celibate, but they want to be priests, and that those sexual desires are still there. And then there's a position of power. This creates a lot of problems that has shown up even in medieval literature in regards to this issue of celibacy. But what was the intent of it? And one shouldn't assume that every priest has that problem. It's been a problem that's been addressed. We can't ignore. But if you look on your text on 305, it mentions that during the 11th century, bishops, church councils, and reformist popes began to insist on celibate clergy. Well, what was one of the issues? It goes back again to the material aspects of the church, the kind of institutional issues. The Bible does not actually mention the idea of celibacy unless it's a choice. It's mentioned as a preferred choice by the writer Paul, to not distract you from spiritual things. That's how the story goes. It's kind of opposite of what Judaism says. You're supposed to get married and produce and have babies with a wife. But in any case, it had a practical thing. It cut off the ability of priests to accumulate wealth and kind of create an aristocracy of priests, if you will. There's a lot of different things that it was trying to cut off. But also keep in mind that this is something unique to the Roman Catholic Church, that the Greek Orthodox, which, as we know, was also a part of the Roman tradition, although very much separating more and more and more from each other, Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, these can all get married. Now, if you go higher up, I believe you cannot. There's different levels of restrictions, but that idea of not having a wife at all comes strictly from the Roman Catholic Church. Now, there was also an attempt to crack down on what's called simony or simony, and I'll talk about more of that in just a little bit. But there was the issue of kings being able to appoint people into church offices that they're in cahoots with. We can see how the politics of all of this created a lot of complications, and the Pope really did his best to assert himself as a monarch, as a ruler. And you see this tension between the monarchy and the church. I mean, it's interesting because it's Islam, the West talks about the separation of church and state, and Islam is associated with not being able to have a legacy of doing that. But do you see Christian history as the separation of church and state? That might come later. It sort of does, but I don't know. It's just something I want to pose to you right there. But I'm going to actually end this here, and I'll continue on with the next lecture.